Thank you so much, Susan, for the introduction to our program. So, in this second video, I will show you how TTT Pacific will use research-based models in order to assist you to design effective online courses. Let me first introduce what I will discuss. Firstly, I will talk about the 7 principles for good practice. I will then discuss how you can design online learning using the ADDIE model. And then finally, I will introduce 2 innovations from Gilly Salmon. These are Carpe Diem Design and eTivities. So let's get started. So, in order to ensure that the highest possible standard is delivered in online learning programs, as you would in class, it's really important to ensure that some standards are met and applied. And the standard that we have decided to use are the 7 principles for good practice. Now, in fact, these are actually known as the 7 principles for good practice for upper education. And these were developed by Chickering and Gamson in 1987 for the American Association for Higher Education. However, they can be easily adapted to an online learning context, and that's why we've chosen them. On the screen in red, you can see each of the 7 principles, and in orange, examples of how they can be applied in an online context, and these are provided by Oliver Drayon. So, starting clockwise at 12 o'clock, first one is encouraging contact. So, any good program, whether it is face-to-face or whether it is online, should encourage contact between teacher and student. So an online context is perfect because it gives students the opportunities to contact teachers at any given time. And teachers should, at the beginning of the program, share their contacts and also their availability, especially in terms of maybe online office Zoom hours. And also, this allows teachers to set expectations of how readily available they will be. Interestingly, anecdotally, it's been shown that email correspondence can actually encourage some students to open up to teachers, and maybe they wouldn't do this in a face-to-face classroom environment. So secondly, a good program should have the principle of cooperation and reciprocity among students. And just as the technology can be used to have correspondence and communication between teacher and student, it can be used for students to work together on group projects without the need to physically meet. So this allows teachers assign interactive tasks, and your students can collaborate, work together, and ultimately support each other's learning goals and objectives. Thirdly, learning should be active. As you know, learning is not a spectator sport. So any good program should have elements of active learning. So an online program should create activities which leverage multimedia, for example, simulation technology, other software applications to create those interactive, active learning elements. Next is that feedback should be prompt. Mimi O'Malley, in her study, actually found out that 79% of her students expected feedback from 2 days to a week. So students are very, very hungry for feedback. So it's important that teachers set an expectation of when feedback will be delivered. And also, Drayon suggests that a mixture of automated responses, activities which generate automatic responses, and also actual personal feedback is delivered in any program. Mimi O'Malley goes one step further and suggests that for those cases where you may deliver personal feedback, you develop rubrics for this. and these will help you speed up grading, and also students will get used to your expectations. This leads nicely into the time on task. So you should be clear at the start of any program how long a student should expect to spend on given tasks, and keep in mind that even though synchronous learning may not be taking place, that does not mean that the students will have more time than in a class setting to dedicate to your classes. So bear that in mind. So there's a case of being flexible, but also you have to consider the duration. Okay, next, any good program from the beginning should set expectations of the students. So it's important to be clear. Be clear of how they can attain target grades, of how long they should expect to spend on tasks, etc. And then finally, any good program should use diverse approaches. And the beauty of an online program leveraging technology is that you can use any amount of technology, multimedia, etc. And this will suit students with various learning needs, learning preferences, and styles. Okay, so let's look at implementing online learning. And for this, we have decided to use the ADDIE model. Now, the ADDIE model was actually first introduced for military and for distance learning programs, and it's made up of 5 elements: analyze, design, develop, implement, and evaluate. It's a very well-known model. It was first readily used for online learning by the Open University of the UK, and it's proven to be very successful. So the first step is analyze. So you should analyze variables such as your students and your resources. Also at this point, it's good to think about the technology that will be used. And for this, we like using the acronym SECTIONS, which was created by Tony Bates. And SECTIONS is used for the media and the selection process that you will use to decide the media, the technology. And SECTIONS stands for students. Who are the students? What access do they have? Ease, how easy is the technology going to be? Will it require training? Will it require support? The teaching, will it help you reach your learning objectives? The interactions, does it facilitate interactions that may be required for you to reach learning objectives? Organizational issues, will it be supported easily within your organization? Networking, does it allow for students to network outside the classroom just as they would do on site? Maybe that's more appropriate for older or third level learners. And then finally, security and privacy. And this is a very important issue at the moment. And in the next video, Marie will delve deeper into this topic. So please stay posted for that. The next step is the actual design phase. And this is when you consider the learning objectives and build the course around that. So you will sit down with your team and your colleagues and decide how the program will look and what content and material you will use. Then you will go from here to actually creating and uploading the content to the learning platform. The next stage is the actual implementation stage, and that's when your course is finally delivered and when the teaching takes place. And then finally, the evaluation stage. So that's when you take feedback from your students, feedback from other teachers, other stakeholders, and then identify areas of improvement. So ADDIE is quite a popular model. It's very, very efficient, and indeed it's been studied by scholars of the lean management approach, lean management thinking, which aims to reduce waste and improve efficiency across business units. And Mahoney, in her study, said that ADDIE is intended to make the process flow smoothly through upfront work. When executed well, ADDIE speeds things up through clarity, consistent communication, and consensus. using a focused narrative and approach. So moving on to that point of designing learning. And for this, we have decided to use Gilly Salmon's Carpe Diem design approach. And there are 6 stages, so please don't confuse this with the 5 stages of learning, which is how learning can be scaffolded to suit learners. This is for the design of the actual content. So, firstly is the blueprint, and that's when you set about deciding what it is that your students need to learn. Secondly, the storyboard. So you and your team will come together and create a visual storyboard, ideally using old school paper, pens, and then you will put the storyboard together, and this will have a flow from the beginning of the course to the end, including assessment. Next, you will begin to build a prototype, and our team will assist you with this, as we are very familiar with the Carpe Diem approach. And in your prototype, you will introduce the activities, which are the online learning activities that you will use throughout the program. So in stage 4, you will get a reality check. And for that, we advise using an outside stakeholder or even a student to come and review the process and point out what they think may not work. So after this identification, after they've gone through their checklist for review, you will then review and adjust. See what works, see what doesn't work, and where you can improve. And then finally, you will decide on next steps. Who's responsible for what, and when you will next meet to discuss and move things forward. And if you pause now, you can see actually some feedback from Armelini and Ayabago as to why Carpe Diem works in their study of 6 programs across 4 UK universities. And indeed, also if you pause at this point, you can read testimonials from actual British universities who implemented Carpe Diem, and you can see why it works quite well and why we advocate using it at TTT. So how do you measure the quality of what you have delivered? So what I would advocate using are the Quality Matters program. And this is from an American association which aims to guarantee quality and the highest standard in education delivery. And as you can see, they've created a point scoring rubric across various criteria: course overview and introduction, learning objectives, assessment and measurement, instructional material, learner interaction and engagement, course technology, learner support, and accessibility. So once you've developed and delivered, you can use this as a scoring rubric to decide how effective your program has been. And as you can see, many of these points are actually repeated from the 7 principles. So please feel free to pause and review these. And you can also find a link at the end in the resources. And then finally, the activities. So as I mentioned, in the Carpe Diem design, you will introduce activities in the prototype stage. And essentially, activities are online activities. Salmon defines these as frameworks for enabling active and participative online learning by individuals and groups. So what are the advantages of using activities? As Salmon herself mentions, they're learner-focused, they're low-cost, reusable, customizable, and scalable, and they work both for an online, a blended, and a face-to-face environment. And Slevin, in his study, mentions that these activities can be used for peer learning, they can be used for active learning, and they also can create a sense of community. And later on in the 5 stages, you will see that collaboration and community are very important. So I'll end by sharing an example of an activity, and you will see this later on in my case study, and then also my resources. Please feel free to pause at any point, and the link is at the end of this video. Thank you for listening.